Welcome back to the Sportsmax Zone. South American giants Brazil, who head into the World Cup as FIFA's top-ranked team, named their 26-man squad on Thursday evening. These are the 26 men tasked by head coach Tite to the sixth World Cup bid for the Brazilians. Their goalkeepers Alisson, Ederson, Weverton. Defenders, the 39-year-old Dani Alves, Danilo, Sandro, Teles, Bremer, Militao, Marquinhos, Thiago Silva. In the midfield, there's Bruno Guimaraes, Casemiro, Everton, Ribeiro, Fabinho, Fred, Lucas Paqueta. The forwards, Anthony, Gabriel Jesus, Gabriel Martinelli, Neymar, Pedro, Rafinha, Richarlison and Rodrigo, along with Vinicius Jr. Some pundits and many fans have questioned the wisdom of going without two informed players, Liverpool forward Roberto Firmino and the Arsenal defender Gabriel Magalhaes. A South American football expert, Tim Vickery, was a guest on Sky Sports News a few hours ago and said this about the Brazil squad. The fellow who has been left out is Roberto Firmino of Liverpool. Brazil are taking a little bit of a risk here. Martinelli is a wide striker, and Brazil have more wide strikers than they know what to do with. What they don't have is a straight replacement for Neymar. They won both of their recent friendlies very well, but he picked up yellow cards in both of those games. If he does that in a World Cup, he's suspended. They don't have an obvious replacement for him in that false nine position. Firmino was their man, but they have decided to leave him out. That heaps responsibility on young Rodrigo to step into that role if needed. Now, joining us to continue the discussion on our World Cup squads, Latin American football correspondent Juan G. Arango. Juan, welcome to the Sportsmax Zone. Well, let me start with those comments that we just heard. Do you agree with them?
Yes, and the one that doesn't agree with them is Chiche, because of the fact that one of the reasons why Roberto Firmino was left off of that Brazil squad, according to Chiche, is the fact that he can move these pieces around a little bit more than he can with Firmino. Firmino, either you can play him in the middle or you can play him out wide if you can. But that's the big problem. You have so many. In total, you have 9 attackers for Brazil. Yes, a lot of them wide. But then you start looking at where Firmino does end up fitting in. Do you take out Everton Ribeiro over on the right side? Probably not. Do you end up looking at taking out Gabriel Jesus or Pedro? Pedro has been one of the most amazing stories so far in this in South American football. Most likely will end up being the South American Player of the Year. So when you start looking at Roberto Firmino, where does he fit in terms of this Brazil? And I think, according to Chiche, maybe that's a big mistake in his eyes. That's where he ends up not asserting properly, because you need a player that can come off the bench, or you need a player that can do either that or start and be able to offer a great dynamic option for either on the wing, especially on the right, or you start looking at him as a false nine option if one of those players, like I mentioned before, does not end up footing the bill.
Yeah. To extend Tim Vickery's point just a bit, do you agree with his sense of a lack of reliability with regard to Neymar and his potential for yellow cards and possibly missing games, putting them in a spot of bother for his replacement? Is that something that you think is real?
Of course, it's always going to be real, especially when the competition does end up ratcheting a couple of notches. But when the competition does ratchet a couple of notches, those types of players tend to not get in trouble. They don't end up making the foolish mistakes. So to a certain extent, maybe that's a little bit exaggerated. Maybe that's a little dramatic, especially when you're looking at it from a friendly context. But if you start looking at other options, the one that's emerged, and I'm surprised that Vinicius Jr. is not being really touted the way he should be, it's him. He's the one that can come in. He's the one that can step into Neymar's shoes. And maybe is he going to be at Neymar's level right now? Probably not, but he's the closest one to it. So when you look at it from that perspective, you end up seeing a player that's really developed over the past couple of years as a mature, as a responsible, as a dynamic, as an interesting option going into the future. If Neymar ends up being an option that can end up being sometimes expendable, that if he's not performing, Chiche can have a quick hook and bring in Vinicius Jr., or does end up switching him over or plays him in the middle. We'll see how it ends up working out. But right now, the main option to me, it ends up being Vinicius Jr.
I love to look at Brazil squads at World Cup time because of the players who are based in Brazil who get picked for the World Cup squad, and it's almost like my secret because I watch Copa Libertadores and the Brazilian League, so I know these players, and it's as if I'm sharing them with the world. But only 3 local-based players in the squad this time. I wanted to tell the viewers who don't know about Pedro up front, because I think you're very, very right. We're looking at the potential South American Player of the Year because of the incredible season the ex-Fiorentina man has had. What kind of player is he? What is Chichi looking for by his selection?
Look, if you ask me, if you would have told me, George, a year ago today, Pedro's going to be on the Brazil squad in 2022, I would have looked at you and said, look, you're silly. But he has been able to do something that is completely incredible, because not only is he on the line, is he on the 26-man roster, he was able to take out one of his own teammates in Gabriel Barbosa and Gabigol, who ends up being a player that was constantly being called up by Chichi. And all of a sudden Chichi says, you know what? Despite Gabigol scoring a goal in the final of the Copa Libertadores, you end up having Pedro substitute him. He has had such an amazing form this year for Flamengo. You could not deny him. Even the Brazilian press is saying there's no way that Chichi can deny Pedro the opportunity. He has the capability of finishing inside of the area with any body part, literally any body part. He has a penchant to be able to go towards goal. He has the instinct inside of the area, not only inside of the area, but outside of the area. He can also associate himself very well. How will he be able to associate himself with Neymar? That's another story. Now you start looking more at Everton Ribeiro. That ends up being probably the best connection as well for him. But overall, a player that is good in the air, is good finishing on the ground, first touch, he can make things happen on his own. A player that's just absolutely dynamic. To me, like I said before, if he's not the South American Player of the Year, it ends up being Jorge de Arrascaeta of Uruguay, who also plays for him at Flamengo. So despite all that, Pedro, Everton Ribeiro, and you even have a very secure third goalkeeper in Weverton over at Palmeiras that have been great assertions in terms of Chichi. And, of course, in the case of Everton Ribeiro and Weverton, have always been part of this World Cup cycle process.
Quick one for you, Juan. Do you think that the Fulham midfielder, Andreas Pereira, who has had a very good season so far in the Premier League, do you think he came close in Chichi's consideration?
Maybe, but I think he came in a little bit too late. The reason why, he played very well while he was at Flamengo. He played very well.
Except for what he did in the Libertadores, but that's another thing.
Yeah. In Libertadores as well as the Brasileirão, he was relatively solid. But seeing what Bruno Guimaraes has been able to do over at Newcastle, seeing players like Fabinho
and Paqueta at West Ham.
Yeah, Lucas Paqueta as well has been very good over at West Ham. Which one of those players do you take out to bring him in? In theory. Now, Andres Pereira's been sensational for Fulham. Yes, he has. But was it enough? Is it enough to take these? It's kind of like if you put Gareth Southgate and what he said, well, some of these players didn't do enough to be able to take, but with substance in this case. Do you take these players that have been consistent contributors for the national team, consistent contributors for their club, and take them out because a player's in good form?
Yeah, Juan, Dani Alves is listed as the oldest Brazilian ever called up for a World Cup squad. His CV is brilliant. What's been the reaction in Brazil to his call-up? Because Brazil aren't accustomed to having 39-year-olds at the World Cup, but Dani Alves is Dani Alves, isn't he?
Yeah, in theory you have two. You have Pepe over in Portugal, who turns 40 in February. But let's stick with Dani Alves, which is a very valid point. I tweeted out as soon as the Brazil call-up was made, was the fact that Dani Alves getting called up is a testament to what he's been able to do, is also a shortage in a position where Brazil has been completely affluent at right back. Having a 39-year-old right back usually ends up not being very impressive. But, of course, Dani Alves is a beast at a different level. You start looking at the other right backs, Emerson Royal over at Spurs.
Rubbish.
Did he really impress that much? No. Fagner, is he going the trusted right back of so many battles for Chichi in the past? No, he hasn't been either. So you start looking at and talking about Brazilian right backs right now, there's a shortage of Brazilian right backs in football. And Danilo comes in as well. But when you have a 39-year-old that still is capable of being effective enough Well, that ends up being a different story, but it does attribute a major shortage at right back for Brazil, at least in the present time.
Oh, well, Juan, we're going to leave it there. Thanks for talking to us. Brazil are listed by most bookmakers as the favourites for the World Cup, ahead of Argentina and France. And George, though, thinks that there'll be a new name etched in for the World Cup title in Qatar later this year. We'll wait to see what happens. The world, you think that's a possibility?
I would agree with that.
Yes.
I would. I mean, you know what? That's not a far-fetched thing to say, to be quite honest.
I didn't think it was. I'm just saying that the point was made. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we'll have a couple of weeks more to talk about World Cup football. Thanks, man.
All right, see you guys later. Bye-bye.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Just before you throw it, quickly, I want to caution people about Brazilian favoritism and wagering.
Yeah, we spoke about this yesterday, didn't we? Yeah.
I went and I did some numbers, and I heard Tim Vickery talking. When I'm saying Tim Vickery, you killed me, because the numbers that I was preparing to drop, you dropped something similar. Well, not quite. But here's the thing. Yeah. Since 2018, Brazil would have played 45 games.
Yes.
Only one of those games, against the Czech Republic in 2019, was against any European team. 11 of those games were against Panama, Honduras, Qatar, Korea Republic, Japan, Senegal. I think they played Senegal twice. The other 33 games, South American opponents. Brazil's form is false form. Argentina's form of consecutive games without defeat, false form, because most of those games have been against continental opponents. And to nail the Brazil point down, every time Brazil has been knocked out of the World Cup, the past 4 or so cycles, is by a team from Western Europe. The kind that they've not played in the last 45 games. Argument done.
All right, George, we still have At the Track to come on today's show. And in the last half an hour, we'll have our NBA segment brought to you by Minute Maid, Powerade and Dasani. But next, we're at Old Trafford, where Manchester United took on Aston Villa in the Carabao Cup, looking for quick revenge after Sunday's 3-1 defeat in the Premier League.